Hey, what's going on? My name's Josh, and welcome back to My Studio Flow, episode 2. This time we're going to talk about the booth, the vocal booth. This is actually a removable vocal booth, if you haven't watched the first episode. And I fabricated this booth in my garage so that I could install it here on site in the studio space that I rented and remove it if I ever need to move. First things first, I probably spent a good few weeks just really contemplating and drawing up different plans. I decided to jog the walls together in the corners. I framed the walls first, obviously, and I framed the ends with 2x2s so I could jog them. I'll show a picture in the video. I jogged them together so that I felt like there would be more surface area touching and more points of contact. And I put it together with camper sealant strip in between. Long strips of camper sealant strip in between all the joints. I put the walls together, all just framed out in my garage. I put long bolts through. Those are, I believe, 7 or 8 inch bolts. Threaded bolts that go through this front wall and into the side wall, through the stud in the side wall and into a threaded sleeve that I put on the studs. So I got it standing up, all framed out, and then I had to start with drywall next, which was a serious feat. Just getting all the drywall home by myself in my SUV was that was a lot of work on a Friday evening. I remember that. So I put all the drywall, first layer of drywall on the outside first. I put acoustical caulking against all the studs, 1/2 inch drywall, boom, slap that up. So then I put acoustical caulking on the second layer of 1/2 inch drywall, hung that. At that point, I cut the hole for the window around where I had the window framed out. The window is separate and removable, but there's obviously a frame around where it's installed. So I had to cut the drywall that I laid just right over it. And I just cut that, boom, real easy. And next step was to fill it full of sound blocker. I used mineral wool sound blocker and fire stopper. I stuffed it real good full of that. I had to obviously make holes for the snake at that point and run PVC pipe through. The sidewall behind me here is where that is. Let's see. At that point, I believe I was running out of materials, running out of money, paying rent on the place, so I would take my time and just do things like, $40 of plywood that I sanded and stained and lacquered when I was in kind of downtime. So I just took the time to make it look as nice as I could. With that being said, I want to say again, if you do not have experience in construction, you really just don't want to take this on by yourself, a project of this nature. You might want to put a booth in a closet with a door that has a window on it and call it a day with a little weather strip around the door. And I had a vocal booth in my home that worked that way great for years. It cut the cake at least. But, all right, moving along. So, once I had the fire and sound stopper insulation up inside, then obviously it was time to start hanging drywall. There's a lot of things to keep in mind as far as like making sure my bolts that are holding it all together are all set well, all the sleeves are in place, because once I put the drywall up, I could not access that anymore, and I don't want to be tinkering with trying to pre-drill and push lags through a bunch of stuff. And so I had to really make sure I had everything right. And then I closed up the inside with another layer of 1/2 inch drywall with acoustical caulking against the studs. At that point, I had 4 walls standing up in my garage. I had no floor and no ceiling, and I had already built the window casing and the glass, and everything was together at that point. And I had to disassemble it all, all the walls, so I could put it on top of a floor, and I had to build a ceiling now. So next step was to build the floor, which is framed out of 2x2 lumber. And what I did was I framed out 2x2 floor. I put plywood on the bottom side with acoustical caulking first all along it. Put plywood, then I caulked all along the corners inside of each stud on the floor. Pictures I'll show here in whatever side of the screen. And then I filled it full of sand. At that point, I had to really make sure it was packed down in there good. I actually left it kind of humped up on the top, you know, bulging over the top a little bit. I packed it good, patty cakes real good. And then I covered it up with another layer of plywood after putting acoustical caulking all along the studs. And then I put plywood. I shot 1,000,000 screws all through into the studs, and then I put a whole bunch of acoustical caulking again, and then without using screws, I laid down a layer of masonite, which I also did on the bottom side. Acoustical caulking, masonite, lay it down. I built the floor in 2 pieces because the booth is 6 by 7 feet outside to outside, and there's no way I was gonna move a floor, 6 by 7 feet completely packed full of sands, all in one piece. So I built it in 2 pieces where they overlap. The plywood overlaps on the bottom and the top over the stud. I did a double stud on the end of each one so that they overlap. So then the next step, obviously, was I had to put together the ceiling after somehow getting all these walls on top of a floor, mostly by myself with a little help from some family and whatnot that might stop by and help me lug some things around. But for the most part, I was moving this stuff around from my garage to my driveway and laying it down by myself, sweating and dying in the Florida heat. So next I had to build the ceiling, which is framed out with 2x4s, just like on the walls. On the ceiling, I did 2 layers of drywall on the bottom side rather than the top side, with acoustical caulking in between, obviously. And that never got on top of the booth until we were here. At that point, once I had all that together, I had the window together, which I haven't covered, actually. The window, I tend to jump the gun on things. I jump the gun on everything. When I decided to make the booth, the first thing I built was the window. I actually had some glass that I had in my garage for a long time from a job a while back, and it was a 1/4-inch tempered glass, and I was lucky enough to have 5 sheets, which means I was able to use 4 sheets for the window is what I used. I used 1 sheet of 1/4-inch glass, and then I have rubber weather stripping that goes all the way around the edge of it, and then there's another piece of 1/4-inch glass. Then I have a strip of wood all the way around, 1x3 in between, and then the next side, which is the same layers of glass. And then I have 1x2 strips of wood on the outside holding it all together. I shot screws from the outside of the casing to hold all the trim in, and it really worked good. Part of me wishes I did the angled glass, but in the midst of everything that I had going on, I just was not trying to figure out all that. I was on a solo mission. I'm working a full-time 8-hour-a-day job with kids and all the regular things that go along with grown-up life. So I really had to just push. I'm talking I was working until 11 o'clock on some weeknights, and then waking up at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning to go to work, and on many nights losing sleep about whatever the next step was, and financing and all the other fun stuff that comes along with all this. So once I had all that together, I was ready to move it all to the studio space here that I had been paying for at that point, I think like 3.5 or 4 months. So I moved all the walls here in a box truck with the help of some friends, which was a serious feat. And upon getting them in here, We laid the floor down as you've seen in the last video and got it all together. And after we had it all bolted together with the trim and everything, you know, holding the corners together, the next step for me was to start building the acoustical paneling that was going to line the inside of the booth. Now, obviously I wasn't going to have perfect even 24-inch by 48-inch measurements, which is what all this Owens Corning comes in usually. So I was obviously going to have to cut a whole bunch of tiny pieces and wrap them in fabric and custom make all my stuff, because I was anti-studio foam. I didn't say that yet. When I made the decision to build that, you know, my booth myself and whatnot, I decided I was not going to do all that work and then put a bunch of garbage looking studio foam in my studio. No offense, I've used studio foam my entire music life, but I had decided that if I was going to do all this work building diffusers and making things look beautiful, I was just not going to use studio foam. So at this point I ordered up 4 boxes of 10 pieces of Owens Corning, 1 inch thick, 24 inches wide by 48 inches tall. And I actually sat in this room right here with a folding table laid out and put together every single piece of acoustical paneling in that booth and in this room. And in that process, I also built all the diffusers and absorbers hanging on the ceiling and in the corners of the room. But that, I have to say, was like the most miserable part of the entire process, was putting together all the acoustical paneling. That was just miserable. I can't lie. I mean, I love the climb and I love, you know, banging stuff out, but that really sucked, you know. But with that being said, I'd do it again because I know I saved a lot of money doing it myself, and the pride you can take in doing it yourself is priceless. And the booth looks absolutely amazing at this point. I'm super happy with it. And, you know, that acoustical paneling was a lot of work, but usually all the best things are, right? So once I had all the acoustical paneling built in there and it sounded okay, one problem I had was a little bit of bass buildup because I only used 1 inch thick acoustical paneling, and I felt like even with my voice there was just a little bit of bass buildup in there. So on the door on the inside, I built a bass trap that I can take off and hang on a wall later on in life if needed or whatever. I built that. It's about 5 inches deep, all Owens Corning that I was able to scrap out of, you know, just scraps and just pieces laying around, and I was able to put that together. It's actually about as tall as me. It takes up the entire inside of the door. And once I got that up, I actually had to take some of the tiles off the ceiling and put little holes in them so that I could push the lights through. During the process, right before putting all the paneling on, I actually ran all the wiring for the lighting. I ran a wire so I could put a backlight around the inside of the window in the future, which I'll probably be doing soon. Probably, you know, LED tape light. You know, it was a whole lot of work, and it will never be over. I'll continue to keep building. And in the future, I do need to do ventilation. That's something I've run into. It does heat up. It heats up in there after a little while. Playing instruments, drums, guitars, people are comfortable, you know, other than it being a little tight. But singing and rapping, people definitely heat up in there. All right, so once I got all that done, I was able to... Man, that was a lot of work. So once I got the bass trap on the door, I still had to worry about a little bit of bass buildup, so I also built a movable bass trap for the corner, the back corner of the booth, which is about 14 inches deep or something like that. So I built that and dropped that in there, and at that point, I was ready to rock. The booth was good, and that's what it took to build my booth. Oh yes, and the door. I added 2 layers to the door, a layer of scrap plywood that I had. I put some acoustical caulking, actually a whole bunch of acoustical caulking, and squeezed it on there and held it on with 5-gallon jugs of Culligan water and let that sit for a while. And then I put another layer, which was, I believe, 1/2 inch MDF, high density MDF, which I laid over it with acoustical caulking and held that on with, you know, straps and water jugs, and it's held up really good, and it stops the sound really good. Actually, I brought some people to help me test that out. Hold on, let me see. You, get them headphones on. Can you do that?
Yeah, I got you, bro.
All right. Yeah, so can you give me a mic check?
Mic check. Hello. What's going
I
on?
can hear it a little bit, but you hear it?
Huh? You hear me? Yes, sir.
Say what's up.
Yo.
You hear it?
Huh? No, I don't hear him.
All right.
No, I'm good.
So anyways,
Sounds good, man.
all right, hit the road. So that is a basic summary of what it took for me to pull the booth together. And I hope you got a good idea of what maybe you might have to look out for, and the type of things you might want to keep in mind when piecing something like this together. Hit me up anytime at itsmystudioflow@gmail.com, and I'll be happy to help and answer any questions you might have. Talk to you soon.